This is my first video update coming to you from Nicosia, Cyprus on this Tuesday afternoon. Let's talk about some news, and let's start things off with what is happening in East Palestine, Ohio, with this train derailment that has turned into an environmental catastrophe, a catastrophe that the Biden White House doesn't seem too interested in. They're not too concerned about what is happening in Ohio. And the story goes that on February 3rd, about 50 cars of a Norfolk Southern train went off track in Ohio, causing a days-long fire in the area. 10 of the 50 derailed cars contained hazardous chemicals, including butyl acrylate and vinyl chloride, which were among combustible liquids that authorities feared could set off a major explosion. Residents of East Palestine were later asked to evacuate out of precaution. On Monday, February 6th, crews conducted what officials called a controlled release of the hazardous chemicals, which caused a large plume of black smoke. The evacuation order was lifted on Wednesday, and since then, there have been a growing number of reports about people experiencing a burning sensation in their eyes, animals falling ill, and strong odor lingering in the town. So I'm sure everybody has seen the photos on Twitter with the huge smoke and the clouds, the dark smoke, the clouds, the dead animals, the dead fish. A controlled release is what they called it. And they actually, at first they evacuated citizens, and then they told the citizens to come back. And I've actually heard statements from, I believe, the EPA, where they've made claims that the water is okay now. And I don't know, just crazy stuff like that. I'm no expert, but I look at the photos, I look at the video, and I say to myself, why are they letting people back into that area? It doesn't make any sense at all. And Pete Buttigieg, who is the transport secretary, he's the guy in charge of trains, planes, automobiles. He should have been the one that should have been first on the scene when this train derailment happened. Actually, I think there were another 2 or 3 train derailments after this one, or that took place 2-3 days ago. So, I mean, this is not like a once in a decade occurrence. This is happening regularly. And why isn't the transport secretary doing anything about it? And why wasn't he in Ohio to see what was going on and to deal with the problem on February 3rd? That is more than 10 days ago. 10 days ago. And I went on to CNN and to the Drudge Report this morning to see if they're reporting on this. Nothing. Like nothing. Morning Time Cyprus. Not one story about what's going on in Ohio. There's actually reports on Twitter saying that reporters, independent journalists who are covering the story or who were trying to cover the story in Ohio were being arrested by police. Sounds like a cover-up, but who am I to say? What this definitely is an environmental disaster. And this is an environmental disaster for which the Biden White House is not doing much about it. And this is the Biden White House that lectures us nonstop about the environment, green energy, the Green New Deal, and all of these things. When it comes to shutting off gas stoves, when it comes to banning people from flying commercial, when it comes to eating bugs, when it comes to getting rid of your car and buying an electric car, whatever they go on and on about. When it comes to all these things, these are things of national security. This is like national emergency. Gas stoves, national freaking emergency. Environmental catastrophe in Ohio, poisoning of the soil and the air and drinking water and all these things. Yeah, no problem. No problem for the Biden White House. We don't even need to talk about it. Let's just not even talk about these things. The same Biden White House that, according to Seymour Hersh, this is the same Biden White House that ordered the destruction of Nord Stream, the Nord Stream pipelines, which was also an environmental catastrophe. And when Nord Stream happened, there was absolute silence from the green activists, the environmental activists, with regards to the impact on the environment. No one reported on it. No one talked about it. Maybe there was like one or two posts about it way in the beginning when they thought when they ran the narrative that Russia did it. When they ran the narrative that Russia did it, you started to see some reports coming out about the disaster to the environment, the ecological damage that this is causing because Russia blew up their own pipeline. That lasted for like a day or two, and it went away quickly when everyone said, come on now, Russia didn't blow this up. The minute everyone wised up and said this was not Russia, did you notice how all of the initial talk about some sort of environmental disaster from the blowing up of Nord Stream disappeared? And then no one talked about it. Greta wasn't there. The Greenpeace wasn't there. None of them. They didn't care about it. That's how you know. That's another sign. That is a huge sign, now that I think about it, that Cy Hersh is 100% right in his reporting that Biden ordered the blowing up of Nord Stream. Because if the collective West, if the Biden White House was, say, 90% or 95% that Russia did it, then they would have just ran with the whole environment thing. Putin, the dictator, not only is he destroying Ukraine, but he's also destroying the environment, and he's destroying the Baltic, and he's destroying this and that. I mean, if there was like hard proof, if they had the evidence, if they had the goods that Russia blew it up, you know that they would have ran with this story. They would have called up Greta and Greta's friends and Greenpeace and all of them, and they would have raised a huge stink about the damage that blowing up the Nord Stream did to the environment. But the fact that they didn't call up all these people, the fact that they didn't raise a huge stink, tells me that they knew Russia didn't do it because they did it. And they told all of the activists and the lobby groups and all these NGOs, all these climate people, just don't say anything, don't do anything. Greta, stay at home. If you guys want to protest something about green environments, whatever, go to the Louvre and throw some ketchup on a Da Vinci painting. That is an absolute giveaway that that Russia didn't do it, but that Cy Hersh is 100% right in that the Biden White House blew up Nord Stream because the whole climate activist gang was completely silent to protect Biden. It's always about protecting Biden. My God, why do we have to protect this guy so much? Incredible. So Nord Stream sabotage. Cy Hersh gave an interview, his first interview since he published his story on Substack. And Cy Hersh said that uncovering the whole Nord Stream blast story was not hard to find. That is a direct quote. It was pretty obvious who did this, according to Cy Hersh. Yeah, absolutely. He also said how today's journalists really don't have sources. Like, they don't really have sources deep inside the Pentagon or the military or in the U.S. government. They don't have real whistleblower, anonymous sources. What they do have, he said, is like a press secretary spokesperson who whispers something to them and then they just kind of vomit it back out in their reporting. That's all they have, he said. He also noted that the reporting on the war in Ukraine is also being manipulated, and that people aren't getting the real story about what is happening in Ukraine. He hinted at this by saying, and I quote, "The war I know about is not the war you're reading about." That is a direct quote from Hersh in this interview. In other words, Seymour Hersh is saying, I have a different account as to what's going on in Ukraine than that which is being reported on by CNN, New York Times, and Washington Post. He knows what's really going on in Ukraine. He really knows the trouble that the Biden White House is in and Europe is in over Project Ukraine and over their support of the Elensky regime. I would not be surprised one bit if Seymour Hersh in the next month or two comes up with another post exposing all the lies about the war in Ukraine, the reporting of the war in Ukraine. I would not be surprised if he comes out with a story like that, because he obviously knows the truth about Ukraine. And since we're on the subject of Ukraine and Nord Stream, let's talk about NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg. And he gave a press conference yesterday, and he said some very interesting things. Of course, he said that NATO is not a party to the war. He did say that, of course. We're just providing weapons, he said, to Ukraine in order for them to protect their sovereignty. That is what he told reporters. And I ask myself, why is it up to NATO to help Ukraine protect its sovereignty? I don't think that's part of NATO's mission. At least last I thought, NATO was all about protecting members in the alliance, and Ukraine's not in the alliance. So why does NATO feel obligated to protect Ukraine's sovereignty? Did NATO protect Yemen's sovereignty? Did NATO protect Libya's sovereignty or Iraq's sovereignty? Actually, NATO was attacking Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan. But anyway, Stoltenberg said that the reason that NATO is not a party to the war but is supplying everything it has to Ukraine is in order for Ukraine to protect its sovereignty. That's now part of NATO's mission. Another thing that Stoltenberg said is that NATO, and I quote, NATO has been training the Ukrainian military since 2014. He said NATO partners have been supplying the Ukrainian armed forces with the necessary weapons and training since 2014. Okay. So does that mean that this is still an unprovoked invasion from Russia? If the Secretary General of NATO is now admitting that since 2014, NATO has been training and arming the Ukraine military and building all the fortifications and all of these things. So is it still an unprovoked war, or can we now shift the narrative and finally admit that this was a provoked conflict? Stoltenberg also said that NATO intends to create a stronger army after any end of the conflict. So there you have Stoltenberg basically telling Russia that if you don't complete your task, your goal in Ukraine, this is what he's telling Russia, if you don't complete your goal in Ukraine, keep in mind that we're going to rebuild the Ukraine military, rearm it, and make it stronger than ever. So he's just basically daring Russia to complete what it needs to do in Ukraine. That's what Stoltenberg is saying in this statement. And that's the way the Russian government is going to read this statement. They're going to say, well, here we have the Secretary General saying that it's now NATO's goal to rebuild the Ukraine military and make it even stronger. So what do we do? How do we react to this statement? Stoltenberg is not the brightest of guys, is he? It's also an admission, in a way, from NATO that the Ukraine military has been completely defeated, and they're going to have to rebuild the whole thing. It's an admission that the Ukraine military has indeed lost, because if the Ukraine military was winning, like they've been telling us for the past 12 months, then why would you need to rebuild it if it's winning, and it's winning big, like they've been telling us? He was also asked about a no-fly zone, if NATO intends to create a no-fly zone, and Stoltenberg said, no, we are not going to create a no-fly zone, because creating a no-fly zone would put us in direct conflict with Russia. So that basically means that F-16s and pilots are out of the question. I would imagine that's what that means, because pilots are not going to be ready for another 3 months. Ukrainian pilots are not going to be trained up for F-16s for another 3 months, if they even get F-16s. So who's going to be flying the planes? Because a no-fly zone means you're going to have the air defense as well as the Air Force. So who's going to be flying those fighter jets that are going to enforce a no-fly zone? It would have to be NATO. But Stoltenberg is saying here there is going to be no creation of a no-fly zone, which means there's going to be no F-16s. Even though the Financial Times reported yesterday that the Biden White House is not ruling out F-16s. Once again, they're back on the table now. F-16s are back on the table, which I consider the whole thing is just one big mess. It's one big mess. The Biden White House has no clue. You have one faction of the Biden White House that is talking nonsense about F-16s and getting an Air Force to Ukraine, and you have another faction of the Biden White House, most likely people in the military and in the Pentagon, most likely the people that tipped off Seymour Hersh. You have this faction that is saying it's over. This is crazy. This is madness. We need to wind this thing down. But that small group of people, Newland, Blinken, Sullivan, Biden, they're absolutely obsessed with Ukraine. Singularly obsessed with Ukraine. Disaster in Ohio? Send $20 billion to Elensky. That's the thinking. There's nothing else except Ukraine for them, for this small group of people. And I don't know if it's that small, but let's say these 4 ringleaders. But there's no doubt that there's another part of the U.S. government, the U.S. deep state, whatever, that is now trying to pull the plug on this thing. But the Financial Times is saying that, hey, fighter jets now are back on the table. It's the same thing as the statement from the U.S. Embassy in Russia that was urging citizens to leave Russia. That's the State Department. That's Victoria Nuland. That's Anthony Blinken. They want to continue the escalation, the fear. That's why they put out statements like that. Because that's the faction of the U.S. government that wants to continue this, driving this crazy train. So those were the statements from Stoltenberg. That's what he said in his press conference. Lloyd Austin has also departed for Germany as well, and Lloyd Austin is calling on NATO members to give over whatever military they have, even though they don't have anything left. Reuters actually ran a report and said the EU, NATO member states, they're out of ammo. They're out of everything. They wouldn't last a day, Reuters said. They would not last a day if they had to fight Russia. Not one day. And then you have the Washington Post coming out with a report saying that the Biden White House is trying to push Elensky to mount a counteroffensive, which goes counter to reports we were getting just 2 weeks ago, which was that the Pentagon was urging Elensky to not mount a counteroffensive, to pull back. Now you have the Washington Post saying that the Biden White House parts of the Biden White House, their sources, they're asking Elensky, they're urging Elensky, they're pushing Elensky to try to go on the offensive. Quote, "We will continue to try to impress upon them that we can't do anything and everything forever," a senior member of President Joe Biden's administration was quoted by the newspaper as saying about the Ukrainian leadership. Publicly, Biden has pledged to support Kiev for as long as it takes to defeat Russia. However, the stance does not apply to the extent of resources that Washington is prepared to send, according to the story published by the Post on Monday. As long as it takes pertains to the amount of conflict, the unnamed official said. It doesn't pertain to the amount of assistance. Ukraine has a diminishing window of opportunity to make territorial gains against Russia before military assistance from the U.S. and its allies dwindles. This is all according to a source at the Washington Post. I'm looking at all of this stuff that's happening from the Biden White House, and all I see is a Biden White House that is completely lost and confused, and they have no plan. Their only plan is, how do we destroy Russia? That's all that they have on their mind. We have to destroy Russia. If it means offensive. Let's push Elensky to create an offensive. We don't care. Let's see what happens. Let's roll the dice there. Maria Zakharova actually replied to this story from the Washington Post, and she said that the newspaper had effectively described what officials in Moscow have called a Western war against Russia to the last Ukrainian. Quote, "U.S. neoliberals have destroyed Ukraine and are exterminating the Ukrainian people. American hegemonic ambitions lead to a colossal loss of life." That is what Zakharova said in reference to this article from the Washington Post, which claims that Washington is pushing Kiev to fight harder. And just 2 weeks ago, they were telling Elensky, allegedly, the Pentagon was telling Elensky to retreat from Bakhmut. It's confusion. There is no plan. It's confusion. Just yesterday, we had a whole bunch of countries in Europe say they don't have any F-16s to send to Ukraine. Now we have the Financial Times saying that the Biden White House is saying that F-16s are back on the table. Actually, the Biden White House, according to the Financial Times, is saying that if the U.S. can't provide F-16s, then the U.S. wants to push their European partners to give away their F-16s. Just pure confusion is what I'm seeing. Panic and confusion. And when you looked at Stoltenberg's press conference, you could see that the guy was scared and panicked. I mean, his body language was a giveaway when he was talking to reporters. The guy knows what's happening, and he is panicking. The Norwegian defense minister, he called Russia the main security threat for the whole of Europe. This should be a clown world. So as they're all gathering in Germany to talk about what they can do in Ukraine and how they can destroy Russia, you have the Norwegian defense minister saying that Russia is the largest security threat, the greatest security threat. Norway, nope. Sorry, Norwegian defense minister. You've lost that right. You've lost the right to claim that any country is a security threat to NATO or to Europe. That right is gone after what Seymour Hersh published. Now that we know how involved Norway was in Nord Stream, and Sweden and Denmark, Norway lost that right. Just like, in my opinion, the U.S. lost the right to lecture the world on freedom of speech after they censored a president of the United States. They lost that right. Now Elon Musk is trying to fix things, and you can see the Republicans, they have their Twitter inquiry, and they're trying to soften things up a bit, trying to fix things up. But nah, the minute you censored a U.S. president, you lost the right to lecture the world on freedom of speech. And Norway, you helped Biden blow up a pipeline, according to Seymour Hersh. And you're going to lecture the world about security, or you're going to say Russia's a security threat. Doesn't work like that. It does not work like that. But that was the comment from the Norwegian defense minister. And I'm trying to think if I have anything else to talk about. It's interesting that Stoltenberg, during his press conference, not one reporter asked him about Nord Stream. Not one. Not one reporter questioned him about what happened, about Seymour Hersh's article. Not one reporter said, hey, Mr. Secretary General, Seymour Hersh, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh, said that the United States and Norway blew up European and NATO infrastructure, critical infrastructure. Do you have a comment? Do you want to deny those reports? Not one reporter. And during the press conference, by the way, Stoltenberg announced that NATO now is going to place top of the list, top of its priority. NATO is going to put pipelines and critical infrastructure, protection of pipelines and critical infrastructure as part of its mission. Top priority. That's what Stoltenberg said. That's what he announced. Isn't that something? NATO to focus on undersea cables and pipelines. NATO will set up a new coordinating body to address threats to undersea infrastructure, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on Monday. His announcement comes just days after legendary investigative reporter Seymour Hersh said the U.S. and Norway were behind the September explosions on the Nord Stream pipelines under the Baltic Sea. Stoltenberg said protection of critical undersea infrastructure will also be high on our agenda, Stoltenberg told reporters in Brussels following the meeting of NATO defense ministers. The U.S.-led bloc has been working on this for many years, Stoltenberg added, and we are now taking it to the next level. A new coordination cell will be established at NATO headquarters to map our vulnerabilities and engage with industry, which will support our efforts to prevent and counter threats to critical infrastructure, including undersea cables and pipelines, according to Stoltenberg. He said further measures will be decided at the NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania in July. Stoltenberg, who was the Norwegian prime minister before taking over NATO leadership in 2014, did not address Hersh's story from last Wednesday. Neither did any of the reporters NATO spokeswoman Joanna Lugescu called on. He was also the prime minister of Norway. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that so interesting? The NATO Secretary General was also Prime Minister of Norway. No questions connected to Nord Stream. And just by chance, NATO is now going to create, what did they call it? A coordination something or another? What was the word a coordination cell to protect critical infrastructure. So NATO is going to protect the critical infrastructure of Europe and of NATO countries. Can you get more mafia than that? I mean, that is like the textbook definition of mafia. Strictly speaking here, I don't know if is that the right phrase, strictly speaking, but if you go by the NATO articles, an attack on one is an attack on all. And the United States and Norway attacked NATO infrastructure, so shouldn't NATO do something about that? You know, isn't that the mantra that they keep on telling us? An attack on one is an attack on all. Well, I think they attacked Germany or German infrastructure, didn't they? The United States and Norway. So shouldn't NATO do something there? Just saying. Just saying. But yeah, so, you know, this is like textbook mafia stuff. Textbook mafia stuff. You have your little shop on the corner, on the street corner, and the mob comes by, the mafia comes by, and, you know, they tell you, look, we'll got a nice shop there. It would be a shame if something happened to that shop, but don't worry, we'll protect you. We'll make sure that nothing happens to that shop. And if you don't buy into their protection, then you can be sure that something's going to happen to your shop. You can put money on it. Textbook mafia. Oh, man. And actually, another thing that Stoltenberg said a lot of dumb stuff during this press conference. I mean, he revealed a lot. He actually now wants NATO member states to put more money into NATO, of course. He says that. He wants more money. He said that the 2 or 3% that member states pay into NATO should be viewed as a floor and not as a ceiling. So that should be like the base entrance, base level. In the past, countries were kind of saying that's the most I'll give, 2% or 3%, whatever it is. I'll give up to that, and that's it. Now Stoltenberg is saying, that's the price that you should start out at, 2%, and then go up. All right, let's do a couple of clown worlds, and we'll wrap this video up here. It's starting to get dark. Let's see, what do we have? What do we have on the table for clown worlds? How about an article from the Jerusalem Post? The Jerusalem Post says that Ukraine can win against Russia by giving up land, not killing troops. This is an opinion piece from the Jerusalem Post. There may be a way for Ukraine to give up some territory, perhaps even one of the 4 southern regions, in exchange for peace with Russia, as well as membership in NATO. So, looks like they're starting to understand that this is lost. Ukraine has lost. And now they're talking about what? Giving up one region in order to end this conflict, and then to still get in NATO. You see, they're still talking about getting in NATO. They haven't understood that NATO is the red line for Ukraine. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting revelation, an interesting title from the Jerusalem Post. And the final clown world, and this one's a good one, has to do with the pranksters Voban and Lexis. And they prank called former U.S. Defense Secretary Esper. Is it Mike or Mark? Mark Esper. And he was the defense secretary under Trump, though he was only defense secretary for like a year, and then Trump canned him because they just did not see eye to eye. Basically, Trump wanted to reduce U.S. troop presence in Syria, the Middle East, and Mark Esper was against reducing the American troops, pulling out the American troops from Syria and the Middle East. And so Trump fired the guy. But Esper was he got a prank call by Voban and Lexis, who pretended to be Petro Poroshenko. This is the second time that they've used Poroshenko. And he said this. He said a lot of interesting things, but the most notable statement that he said was, and I quote, "The Ukrainian people in the conflict with Russia are doing dirty work, which the U.S. would not like to do." What did Maria Zakharova say? Fighting Russia until the last. You know what? That is what Zakharova said, and that is what Esper confirmed. The Ukrainian people are doing the dirty work. All of this has nothing to do with Ukraine. It is this obsession and fixation on Russia, on destroying Russia. That these 4 individuals, for their various different reasons, they're absolutely obsessed with destroying Russia. And that's what Mark Esper is pretty much saying here. Let Ukraine do the dirty work. That's what he told Voban and Lexis. In our live stream that we did today with Dr. Wilmer Leon, Alexander likened their obsession, these 4 individuals in the White House, their obsession with Russia, to that of Moby Dick. Absolutely. That is exactly what is happening here. But I'm going to end this video by just saying this. If anyone in the U.S., in the Biden administration, in the U.S. Deep state, in Europe, in the U.K., and EU headquarters, if you get a call from Petro Poroshenko or Vladimir Putin or Volodymyr Elensky or Lenin or Dostoevsky or Trotsky or anyone like that, if you get a call from anybody who claims to be any one of these Russian individuals or Ukrainian individuals, understand that this is a prank call and it's Vovan and Lexus, because this is just getting ridiculous and sad. Like last week, they used the Petro Poroshenko prank call to get Bolton, and they used it again to get Esper. Oh boy. Understand that it isn't Poroshenko, that it isn't Lenin, that it isn't Putin, that it isn't Lavrov, that it isn't Elensky. It's Vovan and Lexus. Vovan and Lexus. It's a prank. Anyway, that's the video, everybody. TheDuran.locals.com. We are also on Rumble, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.